Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and privilege tonight to introduce Professor Kathryn Weathersby, who's going to speak to us on Korean War. Dr. Weathersby received her PhD in modern Russian history from Indiana University in 1990. And she is associated with the Johns Hopkins University and presently visiting Korea as a visiting professor at Sungshin Women's University. After the collapse of communism in Russia, President Boris Yeltsin opened the Russian government archives only for briefly, and Professor Weathersby had an opportunity to conduct intensive or extensive research in that archives, especially all those coded messages exchanged between Stalin and Kim Il-sung, Stalin and Mao Zedong, and Stalin with other heads of the state, including President of the Czechoslovakia. She published her research results in various publications, books and other papers, and also lectured extensively in Europe, United States, and East Asia. Just to name a few of her publications: The Influence of a Sino-Soviet North Korean Triangular Relations on the Course of the Korean War and Post-War North Korean Foreign Relations, Evidence from Declassified Documents. The other one, the North Korean Enigma, Back to the Future. The Soviet role in the North Korean War, the state of historical knowledge. I'm also pleased to tell you that Professor Weathersby became a council member of Royal Asiatic Society of Korean French recently. So, without further ado, let us welcome Professor Weathersby. With a big round of applause.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. Is it loud enough? Now, is that better? Yes. Okay. It's really a privilege to be here and such a wonderful audience. I'm afraid we have a very sad story to look at tonight. But there's nothing to do but jump in. So here we go. This is the 60th anniversary of the armistice, signed in 1953. So this year is an occasion for thinking about the legacies of this terrible war. I wrote this paper for a conference in July. It was on July 27th, the day the armistice was signed, at Korea University. So what I'll share with you is the conclusions I came up with as I was preparing this paper in the spring. I had sort of a batch of those documents. I brought most back with me from Russia, which was good because then the archives closed up, unfortunately, in the late 90s, once Putin got control of the government. So there was only a window of opportunity in the early and mid-90s. But there was one section of the records of the armistice negotiations that I had never gotten around to looking at. So I thought I would do that for the occasion of this anniversary. And I ended up, though, looking at sort of all of them that were of that period. So it ended up being a more kind of broad-ranging analysis, not just the negotiations themselves, but other aspects of what was going on. So what emerged from this was a conclusion that the way the war was conducted on the communist side for the last 2 years of the war, the period of the armistice negotiations, profoundly affected North Korea. It profoundly affected everyone else as well, but North Korea has been my focus, so I'm focusing on that. The reason is that the North Koreans had very little voice in the armistice negotiations. And at the same time, they were subject to a decision made by Stalin and Mao, on the top there, that the war, once it was safely contained by the entrance of the Chinese and once it became a stalemate, the war was beneficial to the entire communist camp because it was tying American forces down in Korea, keeping American forces bogged down on the Korean peninsula, so they couldn't do some kind of aggressive action in Europe or in the Near East, as the Soviets feared. So both the Soviets and the Chinese insisted that the North Koreans continue to fight, even though they wished to win the war by early 1952. I think that experience profoundly affected Kim Il-sung's relations with his two big patrons. I mean, one can only imagine that it did. But it's worth looking at the way the war started. This is the lecture I gave, I guess, a year ago about the decision to start the war. At that time, in 1950, Kim Il-sung was such a willing subordinate of the great leader Stalin, great in terms of the communist world. He was a young man. This photo is of him in later years, but during the war he was much younger than that. And when he approached his patron and his mentor with his heartfelt desire to reunify Korea and bring the benefits of revolution to the rest of his country, he did so with just complete willingness to subordinate himself to Stalin's decision. But by the end of the war, what we see is Kim Il-sung presenting the war, at least to his own people, as a great heroic victory of the North Korean people all by themselves. The Chinese don't figure into the narrative, nor do the Soviets. This was very irritating to the Chinese and the Soviets. But this began to be how the war was presented even before the armistice was signed. And at the same time, by the end of the war, Kim Il-sung was very forthright in informing the Soviets of precisely what kind of aid they were going to provide North Korea after the war. It was going to be enormous aid, and this is what it was going to be. He presented a list. So those two characteristics have continued to define North Korea. This resentment of outside influence, while at the same time assuming that other people will aid them, not only communist bloc countries, which now are severely reduced in number, but also international aid agencies. I've had many NGO workers who've worked in North Korea tell me that a North Korean official, this is in recent years, will visit them and explain to them what their organization has been allotted as their contribution. We have decided you will contribute this. So as I look at this history, it seems to me that those very pronounced patterns that make it really so difficult for everyone else to deal with North Korea began from this terrible experience during the war. So let me go into that in a little more detail. First of all, the roles of these three leaders. Once the Chinese entered the war in October 1950, they took over the running of the war. The North Korean army was on the verge of collapse. It would have been defeated had Chinese soldiers in huge numbers not entered the fight. So when they did, they had a very low opinion of the military leadership in North Korea. I mean, after all, they were about to lose. And they also had not taken Chinese advice early in the war. So the Chinese commander, Peng Dehuai, made it clear that he was now in charge. Kim Il-sung did not like this and appealed to Stalin to resolve all of the various issues, whether there was going to be a unified command, whether the Chinese were going to take over the management of the railroads, all these different aspects. And every time Stalin sent back a telegram, yeah, do what the Chinese say. So in every case, said, yeah, he agreed with the Chinese proposal and told the North Koreans to do it that way. The same pattern then held throughout the period of the armistice negotiations. Looking at the communications, fortunately we have a pretty complete set of them for the negotiations in case I'm kind of jumping. They went like this. First, from the Chinese head of the delegation, Li Keqiang was his name, to Mao. Mao would then forward the report of what happened that day and any kind of questions. You know, should we do this? What should we do? Should we agree? Should we not agree? What should we propose? All those questions then get sent to Moscow. Stalin sends a message back to Mao. Mao sends a message to his delegation, and they send a copy of the decision to Kim Il-sung. So that's the way it worked. Occasionally, Kim Il-sung's opinion was asked for, but not very often. And sometimes he was not even sent a copy of the communication when it was about something particularly important. Sometimes the communication was only between the Chinese and the Soviets. And always, of course, Stalin was the final voice. This became particularly problematic because of a decision Stalin made in January of '51. Those of you in the front can read it, but I'll read it out to the rest of them. This comes from Romanian archives, actually, an account of a meeting, but there are some other documents of this meeting as well. In January of 1951, so as soon as the Chinese pushed UN and ROK forces out of North Korea, and North Korea was saved, there was no longer danger of American forces being right on the Chinese border, the Soviet border. Stalin called a meeting of all the heads of state and party heads and defense ministers from the Soviet bloc countries of Europe, summoned them all to Moscow, and talked to them about the opportunities the war in Korea was bringing to them. And this is what he said. So the opinion arose in recent times that the United States is an invincible power and is prepared to initiate a third world war. There's a great deal of fear in the Soviet leadership about a new world war. But Stalin goes on and says, As it turns out, however, not only is the U.S. unprepared to initiate a third world war, but it is unable even to cope with a small war such as the one in Korea. It's obvious that the U.S. needs several more years for preparation. The U.S. is bogged down in Asia and will remain pinned down there for several years. I mean, Stalin didn't have any way of knowing what the course of the war was going to be for the rest of 51 and 52. But he's saying in January of 51, the U.S. is going to be bogged down there for several years. The fact that the U.S. will be tied down in Asia for the next 2 to 3 years, kind of strangely accurate, isn't it, constitutes a very favorable circumstance for us, for the world revolutionary movement. These 2 to 3 years we must use skillfully. All right, so the U.S. is going to be stuck in Asia. We need to take advantage of it. So what does he say? The U.S. has atomic power. We have that too. The U.S. has a large Navy, but their Navy cannot play the decisive role in a war. The U.S. has a modern Air Force, but theirs is a weak Air Force, weaker than ours. Well, in fact, by that time, already Soviet fighter pilots were doing a remarkably effective job protecting the Yalu River bridges. American Air Force has quite a record of being able to blow things up. But they were never able to blow up the bridges over the Yalu, a critical route for Chinese soldiers and all of the supplies for the war to enter North Korea, because Soviet pilots were protecting the Yalu River. That was pretty important. Our task consists of using the 2 to 3 years at our disposal to create a modern and powerful military force. This we are capable of doing. We have all the prerequisites for this. China has created a better army than those of the people's democracies, referring to the East Europeans. It's abnormal that you should have weak armies. This situation must be turned around. You and the people's democracies must, within 2 to 3 years, create modern and powerful armies that must be combat ready by the end of the 3-year period. So he ended this meeting by saying, the 3 years at our disposal are not for sleeping, but for arming, and arming well. This is necessary in view of the imperialist way of thinking. They are in the habit of attacking unarmed or weakly armed countries in order to liquidate them, but they keep away from well-armed countries. This is why you need to arm during this respite, and arm well, in order that the imperialists respect you and keep away from you. So this is pretty serious stuff. Right? The imperialists, the United States, are going to attack you if you are weak. So you have to use this period of their being bogged down in Asia to rearm. And after this meeting, they did proceed to rearm for the rest of 51 and 52 and 53. And the Soviets as well engaged in massive rearmament, especially in 1952. When I first read this document some years ago, I took it as being just kind of strangely accurate forecast on Stalin's part for how long the war was going to last. I thought, isn't that odd? He said 3 years. He said 2 to 3 years, and it was 2.5 years after this time. That is strange. But as I put it together with everything else this spring, it kind of dawned on me that this was not a forecast. This was Stalin saying, this is what we are going to make happen. We are going to drag this war out for 2 to 3 years in order to give us time to rearm. And indeed, as the armistice negotiations carried on, beginning in the summer of '51, Stalin consistently instructed his subordinates, the Chinese and the North Koreans, to maintain a hard line in the armistice. That was his instruction, consistent. You must maintain a hard line. In other words, do not accept the terms that the UN side is putting out for you. Maintain a hard line, because they have greater need to reach an armistice than you do. Because if you accept their terms, you will appear weak. So he's consistently saying, in other words, don't accept their terms. Keep negotiating. Keep the negotiations going. What about Mao? Mao also thought it was beneficial to keep the war going, because he viewed the war as part of a very big political struggle he was engaged in with the capitalist world led by the United States. He was a great revolutionary leader, now the great new emperor of China. So he has to take his place as the leader of revolution in Asia. For him, the way the war in Korea ended had to be politically advantageous for China, for the revolutionary movement in China. And so as long as the Americans were insisting on things like voluntary repatriation of prisoners of war, which would have been politically very embarrassing to China, why Chinese POWs could choose whether to go back to the PRC or go to Taiwan. And a lot of them decide to go to Taiwan. That's not ending the war in a politically advantageous way. So Mao also wanted to keep the war going so they could finally get some conclusion that would benefit him politically. What about Kim Il-sung and Park Han-young? They began by early '52 to say to the Chinese military leadership, the Korean people demand peace and do not want to continue the war. The reason being the destruction they were experiencing from the bombing. The photo of a napalm attack in North Korea. As the war dragged on, the United States got more and more frustrated with their inability to break through on the ground. What we had was huge air presence, huge ability to bomb. As I tell my students when we talk about this very painful subject, all of us tend to use whatever we have. Whatever our strong suit is, we use that. And we tend to exaggerate the ability of whatever that is. Maybe we're wealthy, so we think money will get us what we want. Maybe we're really smart, and we think smarts will get us what we want. Maybe we're great athletes, and we think that will get us what we want. And we tend to exaggerate the ability we have to use that strong suit, make other people do what we want. So the United States had Air Force and had air power, and it used it. It wasn't bringing the result it wished, which was for the other side to give up, but there wasn't really anything else, so they just kept bombing. They just kept bombing, and then they bombed some more, and then they bombed more, and then they bombed more. Continuous until the end of the war. I saw a Russian estimate done at the end of the war, and this was quite objective because this was somebody whose job it was going to be to rebuild the thing, the place, and so he was having to estimate the extent of the damage in North Korea. And he estimated that 85% of all buildings in the entire country were destroyed. I can't think of any other country that has experienced that level of destruction. Parts of Germany did, but not all of Germany. Warsaw experienced it, but not all. This was 85% of the buildings in the entire country. It's an extraordinary level of destruction. Irrigation systems were bombed by the end of the war. Power plants, anything. They ran out of targets, so they were just bombing. Because of this, then, the North Koreans began pressing the Chinese and the Soviets to reach an armistice, bring the war to an end. But, and it's really very poignant to read this, in early '52, when they're going to fly and say, the Korean people want peace, they do not want to continue the war. Then they say, but if the Soviet Union and China consider it advantageous to continue the war, then the Central Committee of the Korean Workers' Party will be able to overcome any difficulties and hold their position. So they are being loyal to the cause. Now, explained after a couple more requests from the North Koreans to end the war, explained to them exactly why they needed to continue the war. He said, at present, when the enemy is subjecting us to furious bombardment, accepting a provocative and fraudulent proposal which does not signify, in fact, any kind of concession, is highly disadvantageous to us. The only harmful consequence of rejecting the proposal of the armistice negotiations would be further Korean and Chinese losses. And so that were not something substantial. But then he said, since China began to aid Korea, the Korean people have been standing on the front line of defense of the camp of peace of the whole world. Moreover, so what they're doing is really important. They're on the front line of the camp of peace for the whole world. Moreover, through their sacrifices, both North Korea and Northeast China have been defended from American aggression. You may remember that MacArthur talked about taking the war into China. An additional benefit is that the people of Korea and China, especially their armed forces, have received the possibility of being tempered and acquiring experience in the struggle against American imperialism. So you're gaining valuable experience. Mao further emphasized the international importance of the war. He said the increased might of the Korean and Chinese people in the course of this war is inspiring peace-loving peoples of the whole world in the struggle against aggressive war, and it's facilitating the development of the movement for defense of peace throughout the world. This international support limits the mobility of the main forces of American imperialism and makes it suffer constant losses in the East. Moreover, with U.S. forces bogged down in Korea, the Soviet Union, which is the stronghold of peace throughout the world, can accelerate its rebuilding from World War II and exercise its influence on the development of the revolutionary movement of peoples of all countries. This will mean the delay of a new world order. So this is why North Korea needed to continue to experience this destruction from the bombing, because it was delaying a new world war. So Mao admonished Kim that accepting the enemy's proposal would bring great harm. To accept it under the influence of the bombing would put China and North Korea in a disadvantageous position, both politically and militarily. All right. Kim Il-sung didn't challenge this, but he did make a request that they at least send fighter planes inspection over Pyongyang, so that Pyongyang couldn't continue to be bombed. When the Soviet Air Force entered the war, November 1st, 1950, they had strict limitations on the area they could operate in, because Stalin was terrified that the presence of Soviet pilots would become known and would be an occasion for the United States to start a war with the Korea. And he knew he was not ready to fight the U.S. So that was his number one goal: prevent what was happening in Korea from leading to war with the U.S. So they were able to fight over the Yalu. This is the strip that came to be called Mig Alley. Some of you may be familiar with that. And as I said earlier, they were really successful. I went to a conference, when was it? 2001, that the U.S. Air Force held in Honolulu at Hickam Air Force Base to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Air War. They just picked 51 as a date. And it was really fascinating to me, because at the reception at the end of this conference, the conference involved veterans primarily. There was only one panel with scholars, and all the other panels for 3 days were veterans telling their memories. And so it was a big reception at the end in this great big hangar on the base. And at the end of the hangar, past all the food and everything, were 2 planes that had been lovingly restored by guys who worked on the base for this conference in their spare time. And it was a MiG-15 and an F-86, the American fighter jet and the Soviet fighter jet. They were so proud to be able to display these 2 planes, because for them, the war in Korea was this hugely important moment in Air Force history. It was the first time jet-powered fighters had been used, and the MiG was such a good and worthy opponent of the F-86, the American plane, that this was really a heroic fight between these 2 planes. For these guys, it was all about the planes. It was a war between these 2 planes, right? And they were pretty evenly matched. So the Soviet air intervention was impressive, but Stalin did not extend the air cover over Pyongyang. He did not accept or did not approve his request. Stalin had a series of conversations about the war in August of '52 with Zhou Enlai, the foreign minister under Mao. And assured China that he would give it everything it needed to continue the war. Because at this point in August of '52, Stalin is still trying to buck up the spirit Chinese to make sure they'll keep fighting. But then he asked about Korean morale. Joe answered that the bombing of the electrical station on the Olive had affected North Koreans' morale. The Americans had failed to frighten Korea with their bombardment, but Korea is wavering somewhat. They're in a slightly unsteady state. Among certain elements of the Korean leadership, one can detect a state of panic. In response, Stalin simply acknowledged that he had been informed of this. Now, what they did do, the North Koreans do, while they couldn't question Soviet strategy, couldn't challenge it, they could begin refusing to acknowledge the Chinese support. They didn't turn their propaganda against the Soviets. That would be too dangerous. But they could start disrespecting the Chinese, and they could. So, in numerous statements, they began resisting the war, as I said earlier, as something being done purely by the North Korean people, by themselves, under the heroic leadership of Kim Il-sung. The Soviet political advisors who were in North Korea at the time had to correct them. So we have a number of documents, resolutions of the Korean Workers' Party, where the Soviet political officer has rewritten the text to include an acknowledgement of the Chinese support and also the support from other fraternal countries, Soviet bloc countries. Now, there's another aspect of this. Which is that despite the bombing and the extraordinary level of destruction, the Soviets insisted that North Korea continue to meet its agreed quota of exports of precious minerals to the Soviet Union. So, for example, records of the group that was in charge of rebuilding the railroads began their report by saying that the number one priority was to rebuild the lines that carried the export of minerals to the Soviet Union. That was done before anything else was rebuilt. This is a list of what was sent to the Soviet Union for the first 8 months of 1951. I thought you might find it interesting. So, 5,000 more tons of gold and silver, copper ore, tungsten concentrate, molybdenum concentrate, beryllium concentrate, niobium concentrate, zinc concentrate, zinc cake, zinc carbide. These are in large quantities, if you can see this on the screen. I won't read all the numbers. Ferrocylite, instrumental steel, whatever that is, lead concentrate, lead ore, and lead. There's a lot of mining going on. Soviets did send specialists from the Soviet Union to help in this process. They did at least do that. But this continued in the middle of the war, which I found really amazing. At the same time, you can't read this. So maybe a few people at the beginning. If North Korea was going to continue to fight the war, they needed a whole lot of stuff in the face of all of this bombardment. So this is a record of what was sent. From the fraternal countries, so-called. Coal. I mean, how odd, right? They're sending coal. China is sending coal to North Korea. Coking coal from China. Coal pitch, cast iron, nails, wire from China. Then from Poland, 2,000 tons of fittings, iron pipes, steam-fired pipes, gas pipes, water pipes, smokestacks from Hungary, air compressors, amp meters, battery meters, voltmeters, universal wrenches from Romania. From Czechoslovakia, 25 locomotives, and 22 from Poland. 15 cargo engines from Poland, 25 passenger locomotives from Czechoslovakia, 3 from Poland, 24-ton trolleys, hand trolleys, air brakes from Czechoslovakia, 1,000 sewing machines, stocking machines, knitted fabric machines, and silk machines from Czechoslovakia, 2 button presses, tons of offset ink, typographical ink, meters of driving belts from Romania, auto parts, handicraft equipment from China, telephone switchboards and telephones from Poland, bicycles from Czechoslovakia and China, radio receivers from Hungary, offset machines and X-ray units from Czechoslovakia, aerometers from Romania, X-ray machines from Hungary, dental equipment, mobile dental clinics, microscopes, sterilizers from Czechoslovakia. A lot going from Czechoslovakia. We're very privileged to have industrial facilities tonight. Syringes and needles from Hungary, penicillin from Czechoslovakia, ether, potassium acid, medicine, cotton wool, gauze, bandages from Hungary, paper, glossy paper, newsprint from China, wrapping paper, textbooks, cardboard bindings, meters of imitation leather, cotton yarn from Bulgaria, fabric from Poland, sewing thread from Bulgaria, towels, heavy-duty stockings, woolen fabric, cloth, tents, army boots, workers' boots, pencils, toothbrushes, sewing needles, millet from China, vegetable foods from China. And this is just one list from one period of time. So there was really a lot of supplies being shipped via rail and across those important ridges over the Yalu. But they came all the way from the Soviet bloc countries of Eastern Europe. That's a long way. So shipped across the Trans-Siberian and then down into Manchuria and across into North Korea. Now, put all of this together, and what happened was that 4 days after the armistice was finally signed on July 27th of 1953, Kim Il-sung informed the acting head of the Soviet embassy, the chargé at the time, Mrs. Dallas, that the DPRK had decided to invite 62 Soviet specialists to spend 6 months in North Korea in order to ascertain the scale of the reconstruction work, establish the requirements for equipment, materials, workers, draw up estimates for the reconstruction of industrial enterprises, establish priorities, and fulfill other tasks. So we have decided this is what you will do. And they did it. They did it. post-Stalin leadership in the Soviet Union was more favorably inclined toward North Korea. Stalin died in March of '53. So a few months before the armistice was signed, it was his death that enabled the communist side to agree to an armistice. As soon as he died, the very first decision the new leadership made in Moscow was to draft instructions to the Chinese and North Koreans to accept the terms of the UN side for an armistice. And they considered it necessary to fulfill all the requests of the North Koreans. The new leadership was not as brutal as Stalin. Not that that's saying much. And indeed, they did provide a massive amount. For 54 to 56, the first planned period after the war, 75% of capital investment in the DPRK was financed through grants from the fraternal countries. 25% of the budget was direct aid from the fraternal countries. 81% of imports came via credit from fraternal countries. And China contributed 34 divisions of soldiers to provide free labor. That was their form of aid. Quite a lot of soldiers who would be left behind in North Korea to be the workers for rebuilding the country. With this going on, Kim Il-sung held to an economic policy of autarky, as Stalin had pursued in the 1930s. But by this time, the Soviet leadership had moved away from that argument because they concluded it was not an efficient use of resources to try to do everything within one country, to have all branches of the economy exist within one country. So they needed to be cooperative, use the varying advantages of each side. But Kim Il-sung refused to do that. The Soviets and the East Europeans criticized him for deviating from the new policy, but he held to it, with the result that we know today. Now, just in conclusion, this is the signing of the armistice. I think it's worth pondering just what it must have been like. When Kim Il-sung so confidently pressed the Soviets in early 1950 for permission to make an attack on South Korea, it would only last a few days, a few weeks, at most it would be over. People of South Korea will welcome us, they will rise up and greet us with great joy. The war will be over quickly. He could scarcely have imagined that the war would have ended with the complete, utter destruction of the country at the insistence of that same patron that he turned to for permission to start with. And there are lots of ways we can look at this. Of course, we can say, well, we started the war, we got what we deserved. The North Koreans got what they deserved. They started the war. Understandable to have that attitude. But for purposes of understanding the broader implications of the war, I think it's useful to try to imagine how this experience was for the people of the North. And also, in a broader sense, the North is Korea. So even though they were the ones that started the war, this was still Korean land, Korean territory that was being destroyed. So I'll stop there.
Can entertain a few questions from the floor.
Yeah, two questions. Kathryn, sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you. Two questions. One, in your research, how much coordination did you see between the war in Korea and the war on China's western flank in Indochina? End of Korean War in 53, French defeat in 54, if any. And secondly, nothing. Okay, well, second question then. The Soviets were always extremely wary about accepting the North Korean and Chinese claims of biological warfare by the Americans. Why was that? What's your take on that?
To answer the first question, I haven't seen anything at all about BW. This is my least favorite subject. I have seen just a little, very small number of Russian documents, but not even the documents themselves, but a hand-copied version that a Japanese journalist copied who had access to the archive, well, somebody from the archive. Anyway, which is not a very good situation for a historian. It makes us nervous. But I have had confirmation from people in the archive that no, those documents are real, and certainly Russia has never refuted them. They revealed that the claims of BW or biological warfare by the Americans were cooked up by the Chinese, eagerly embraced by the North Koreans, and then the Soviets sent various specialists to help them manufacture evidence. They did things like get cholera bacterium from Beijing, send it to some place in North Korea, and infect some people who were sentenced to be executed, and then use their body for evidence when the international delegations came to explore these claims, investigate these claims. So it seems that it was a massive propaganda effort. After the war, the Soviets quietly refused to ever support it, but China still supports it, and of course North Korea. The ferocity of the bombing, I think, created a perfect opportunity, to use this as propaganda against the Americans. It was widely believed in all over the world. In Europe, it created demonstrations that disrupted meetings with NATO. So it's quite an effective propaganda campaign.
Why did the Russians not support it after the war was finished when you were sending people up there to
because there was a new leadership in Moscow, and because they were, as best I can tell, I don't have full records of this by name, as best I can tell, they were worried that these crude attempts at fabricating evidence would become known, and that would be really embarrassing to us. I think that's why. Yes, and that's true. Oh, well.
Two comments. Comment to this rather Indochina zero connection. From the Czechoslovak point of view, we had 2,000 Czechoslovaks fighting on the French side. Of them, 200 died. That means Czechoslovakia was following very much what's going on. They hadn't combined. It was totally different war, totally different groups were looking at. The second comment is about the Czechoslovak revolution. because Czechoslovakia used to be then the most industrialized part of the Soviet bloc. It was automatic that we were giving the aid to North Korea. It was not even the question about the payments. The prickly questions about the payments came only after the war. And the government announced that everything which was given to North Korea during the war was free of charge because it was a friendly approach. The question of the list, you mentioned 25 plus 25 locomotives, I'm pretty sure it's 125, not 225. And the lists are unending. You can create dozens of various lists which are totally incomprehensive to each other. And I think the complete lists are those which complete all the things. There was such a mess, even in systematic Czechoslovakia then, that to create a complete list of what was given by government, various so-called NGOs, people's donation, is practically impossible to create. That means I would say that what we find on the internet list is true. That means the complete group from our point of view is that we were the biggest European donator to North Korea after Russia, of course. And in our case, it was 1 billion Czechoslovak crowns, which is difficult to recount, but the amount was enormous. Well,
it would be great eventually to get a more accurate and thorough look. Thank you. Yes.
You said that Stalin was afraid that the West would initiate a new World War III. And given the American rapid demobilization after World War II and pulling back from Korea among other places, what possible evidence or intelligence do you think he had for that conclusion?
Well, that's a very good question. It's true, before the war, the U.S. had demobilized near extinction. The reason why the U.S. did so badly at the beginning of the Korean War. But when the war began and the U.S. viewed it as a Soviet action that had to be resisted, or else such actions would continue all around the Soviet periphery and we'd end up in World War III. Immediately, the U.S. began rapidly rearming. The defense budget tripled, sent naval forces into the Taiwan Strait, sent support to the French in Indochina, solidified NATO, made NATO into a real mutual defense alliance, agreed to station U.S. forces in Germany indefinitely. All of this action happened, and many other actions, in response to the outbreak of the war in Korea. So, because of that, there was this new mobilization happening just before he made his speech in January '51. But also, before the war began, the previous year saw considerable setbacks for the Soviets. The Berlin blockade failed by the middle of '49. Separate states in Germany were created, so the Western occupying powers solidified their zone, and that appeared to be very dangerous and hostile to Stalin. NATO was created. The U.S. had supported Iran and established a relationship of military support to Iran, just as the southern border. It had also supported Turkey. So it appeared that there was a lot of pressure action on the Soviets from their western side and their southern side. The U.S. sent naval forces into the Turkish Strait in support of Turkey. So that combined with the beginning of rapid rearmament following the outbreak of the war, but plus, Stalin just thought in those terms anyway. Was convinced that there would be a new war with the capitalist powers because they were capitalists. That's what capitalists do. So with all those things.
Can you speak loud?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good.
A while back, I read a book called Mao, the Unknown Story by Jong-un. I'm probably butchering that name. In the book, the author claims that even though Mao was suffering high human losses, the reason why they were supporting the extension of the Korean War is because they were getting lots of technology, military resources, and other help from the Soviet Union. Did your research?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the war in particular was the occasion for building an air force for the PRC from scratch. So Soviet air units were not only guarding the bridges over the Yalu, but they were training Chinese pilots from bases in Manchuria. And also they were receiving the latest Soviet weaponry and learning how to use it. Yeah.
Was there anything about negotiations of nuclear technology for the Chinese or their participation in the Korean War? Okay.
Actually, nuclear weapons are almost absent in the records. There was a mention of them in what I quoted today, but that's Stalin bragging that nuclear weapons, we have them too. But there was never any mention of them in the correspondence between Stalin and Mao. I can't recall a single instance when they talked about nuclear weapons.
I think I can speak loud enough, yeah. And demand from MacArthur to bomb these Chinese cities, were they taken serious by the Russians at all?
I haven't seen discussion.
No?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's not to say there wasn't, but I...
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
When MacArthur stood at the Yellow River, at the border of China, was there a plane B from China or Russia, what to do in case he invades? Or was it all clear to them that he wouldn't?
Well, China had already massed its troops along the border, protecting against such an eventuality. So China was ready to intervene.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was that. The Soviets were dilly-dallying about providing air cover.
So they did everything to hold him back. Otherwise, that might have to declare war. But when he really invades China,
yeah.
it became too obvious then. But
Yeah.
Russia never declared war, right?
Pardon?
Russia never declared war on South Korea.
Russia?
Yeah, they just stood behind the
Russia had
team.
nothing to do with the war.
Right. The junior part did it, right? He's in the voluntary army.
Probably, they knew nothing about it.
People's Magazine question?
Yeah.
Did you find evidence that Stalin's son was one of the...
Mao's son.
Mao's son?
No, I haven't seen anything about that.
So, maybe a rumor.
No, I think it's true. I think it's true. I
Just no evidence?
Well, no, I think there's
There's plenty of evidence. Chinese evidence.
But
There's Chinese evidence,
yeah.
Okay.
But I haven't seen any discussion of that.
Okay.
Evidence of what? Could you clarify?
That Mao's son was killed in the fight.
Okay.
Back here. Who's calling? You or you can call. All right.
Thank you for your time as a Korean. Well, Korean War is a total war for us, right? So that was good. But in conclusion, when it's time to hold this, I remember reading a small article about this. Korean War is a, can I say, substitute for World War III. I mean, my question is, it had a stabilizing effect on Cold War. Is my question. I'm a very special question.
I don't know if it had a stabilizing effect, but it militarized the Cold War. That's for sure. And the fact that it did remain limited to Korea, it did not escalate in World War III, into World War III. You could call that stabilizing the Cold War, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, that was a of all of the major powers to make sure that this fighting, as extreme as it was in Korea, did not spread and lead to another world war. We have to keep in mind that this was only 5 years after the end of World War II, and every world leader had been deeply affected by the experience of living through World War II. So naturally, they're seeing everything in terms of the huge trauma they have just gone through, and they are all saying, we have to prevent that at all costs.
We all know there's a particular American historian that might disagree with you about the Korean War, but what about here in South Korea? How have your findings been received? Have you faced any pushback from academics with, alternative views?
The main pushback I get is in talking about the roles of the Soviets and the Chinese. There's a desire to see it only as a matter of Korean action. Among some people in the academic community here and outside academic community. I'm teaching a course this semester called The International History of the War. That's why I titled it that way. The war makes no sense if you don't look at the roles of the outside powers. But, it seems that was one reaction to the war, is the way it seems to me. I may be wrong about this. Being at the mercy of the decisions made by the big powers led to a kind of desire to ignore the big powers and say, we're only going to talk about Korea. Forget about those big powers. It's only going to be about us. I see a certain amount of that, but it's and I understand that impulse, but it's impossible to understand what happens if you don't look at the international context.
Elaborate more of the differences with the first coming.
I'm tired of that subject. Well, there's also, but actually it's kind of a nice segue from your question, because there's an inclination on the part of some within the American scholarly community to see everything as being about the U.S. So those who are, surprise, and you know my wonderful countrymen, including me, who do tend to see us. But in the case of people on the left, politically, that who opposed the Vietnam War, and that's how I got into this discussion. Because when I was at university, the Vietnam War was raging, and I was so horrified. I wanted to understand what was going on. So anyway, I understand that. But people whose views were shaped by the trauma of Vietnam, then sometimes want to see everything as being done by the United States. And they really resist evidence of the importance of the Soviet War. Now, it wasn't Stalin who decided to start the war. It has to be an American somehow. It was, Willoughby, blah, blah, blah. So, I think that's sort of the root of the problem. Is to get sort of fixated on whatever, our issues are, and see everything in terms of that particular story, that particular anger we might have, or fear, or resentment. it takes some discipline, emotional discipline, to step back and really look clearly at the whole picture. Kind of, let all of our emotions be quiet for a little while and just look at what actually happened. It's actually a rather difficult thing to do.
I just have a very simple question about the practical aspects of your research. Your research was in Russian, and you had in the triangulation here between the Russians, the Chinese, and the North Koreans. Did the Russians provide their vetted translations in Chinese and Korean to make sure that the message was getting across exactly as Stalin wanted it to be understood?
Yeah, sure. They were pretty good at that.
They were,
yeah. They also were wonderful at record keeping, which is really great. It's an interesting phenomenon that authoritarian countries, all the ones I know of, have kept great records. The Nazi records are superb. The records of the military dictatorship in Argentina. Even Pol Pot's regime in Cambodia, under the chaotic situation, have meticulous records of their genocide. It's sort of an interesting thing. But yeah, the records are very careful.
So they provide the Chinese translation of Stalin's words. That's what I have.
Well, the telegram would go to the Soviet embassy by ciphered cable in Beijing, and the embassy then would translate it into Chinese and deliver it in person to the Chinese. And meanwhile, the archive in Moscow would eventually get a copy of the printed version of that ciphered telegram, the unciphered version of it.
Thank you very much.